Hi everyone. My name is Janice Bria, and I'm here to introduce you guys to an organization that I'm starting up. The organization is called the Harvard Dance Experiment, and the idea is to bring together all of the different dance groups at Harvard and have them offer self-contained workshops for complete beginners. And so the idea is that people who really don't know how to dance but are interested in learning could try out a variety of styles that are already here at Harvard from other students, and just have a really informal space for people to get together and exercise and just have fun. So if you think you might be interested, we're trying to gauge how many people might be interested and see if we can make this a reality. Please join the Facebook group, Harvard Dance Experiment, or send an email to hdancexp@gmail.com. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. So here's what we're going to do today. Today we're going to finish up with the mind-body. We're going to talk about sleep. We're going to talk about touch. And then we're going to move on to a topic that I'm absolutely in love with, which is love. We'll talk about relationships. Where we finished off last time, we talked about the mind-body connection. We talked about the importance of exercise. We talked about the importance of mindfulness meditation, how it quite literally transforms, changes the form of our brain, making the left side of the prefrontal cortex more active relative to the right side. And then we talked about the importance of breathing, and how breathing, if we introduce it strategically throughout the day, can quite literally change our lives, whether it's standing in front of a red light, whether it's the first thing when we wake up in the morning, whether it's as we enter the class, or right now. Deep breathing, deep belly breathing shifts us from the fight or flight response to the relaxation response. Remember, one of the things that we talked about at the very beginning of the course is that I will not be teaching you many new things here. And this is a clear example of that. You all know how to breathe deeply, properly. You knew it from the day you were born, or the moment you were born. But over the years, with increasing levels of stress and the lack of recovery, over the years with the mounting pressure and the speed of modern life, we've had limitations imposed on us. We've been put under stress. We haven't been taught how to recover. And what we need to do now is chip away those limitations. Go back to our innate inclination of breathing deeply. And when we do that, we reverse the fight or flight and create a growth spiral between calm and well-being and deep breathing that leads to more calm and well-being and more deep breathing. The next topic I want to talk about, but I don't want you to apply it right now, but later, is sleep. Here are some statistics about sleep. So before Edison invented the light bulb, people slept on average about 10 hours every 24 hours. 10 hours a day, most of it at night, but sometimes during the day as well. Today, the average person gets about 6.9 hours of sleep during the week and 7.5 hours of sleep on the weekend. That's the national average. For college students, it's a little bit different. How many people, just so I get a show of hands, how many of you, other than me, get a full 8 hours of sleep a night? Okay. I'm sure there are many more. They're probably asleep now. So here is the national average. Between 18 to 29-year-olds, about a quarter get 8 hours of sleep. 75% don't get enough sleep. Now, for some people, they need 7 hours, some people need 9, some 16. No. The average is 8. We all vary somewhere around that. There are very few people that need very little sleep, and there are very few people that actually need a lot of sleep. And how do we know how much sleep we need? When do we wake up naturally? When we go to sleep when we're tired. And that's how we can gauge it. It's around 8 hours. Now, many people are saying, okay, for me to get 8 hours of sleep, I'll need 30-hour days. It's not enough. It's a third of 24 hours. That's too much. I can't afford it. Well, you can afford it if you look at it as an investment, if you make it a priority. It's like a business person going and making a deal and saying, well, I can't afford spending $100,000 on this deal. Well, you can't afford giving it away, but what if you will get a return on investment of 20% a year? Then it changes. Then yeah, maybe I can afford 100,000 if there is an ROI, return on investment on it. The same with sleep. And there's a lot of return on investment on these 8 hours. A lot of research showing how important sleep is and why we need to make it a priority. So let me list just a few very briefly. First of all, physical immune system. Strengthens significantly. We all know that when we go on little sleep, we're more likely to be unwell after an exam period, and of course it's related to stress as well, but sleep in and of itself, enough sleep strengthens our immune system. Energy levels. There are a lot of theories going around that, well, it's better to sleep 5 hours than 7 hours because of certain cycles, and yeah, these cycles exist. But in general, more sleep to a point is better. If we're sleeping more than 10 or more than 11 hours a day, sometimes it's associated with going through difficult times. Sometimes it's associated with depression. Depression can lead to insomnia, or it can lead to the opposite, sleeping too much. But as I said, if you're sleeping 10 hours a day, it may mean that you need 10 hours a day. Doesn't mean that you're depressed, doesn't mean that there's something wrong. But check it out. See throughout your life how many hours of sleep did you need on average. More sleep is generally better up to a certain point. We talked about physical exercise, and that when we don't exercise, what we're doing is our weight goes up beyond its base level, beyond its God-given or genes-given, our natural state. Which is why most diets fail when they're not associated with exercise. The same applies to sleep. If we don't sleep enough, we go beyond our base level of weight. Actually, correlation, and not just correlation, causation. Lack of sleep to putting on weight. And if we try and diet, we're fighting our nature again. Simply sleep enough, that's one of the contributing factors to effective weight management. Motor skills. 100,000 road accidents on average each year as a result of lack of sleep. 40,000 injuries, 1,500 people killed a year in this country as a result of lack of sleep. Either themselves being the drivers who didn't sleep or being on the receiving end of the accident. In the workplace, day in and day out, accidents are caused because of lack of sleep, costing the economy an estimated $100 billion a year. Cognitive functioning, whether it's creativity, productivity, as well as memory, that is hurt when we don't sleep, which is why sleep is such an important investment. Very often we say, well, let me stay up 2 more hours so I can study. Whereas in fact, you would get much more studying done. You'll remember the material better, be more creative if you get these extra 2 hours of sleep. Good return on investment. Very often we can learn a lot about ourselves through babies. Why? Because babies don't suppress emotions. What happens to a baby when he or she doesn't get enough sleep? They're cranky, they cry, they're miserable, they're anxious. We know that. Now, we learn not to look like that baby that we saw when we talked about the permission to be human, to cry one moment and to laugh the next. So we suppress these emotions. But we still have them, no different when we don't get enough sleep. That's when our fuse is shorter. That's when we, blow up more often. That's when we feel anxious. Again, it's unhealthy on the physical level. Of course, it's unhealthy psychologically. Affects depression in an even more significant way for two reasons. The first reason, that lack of sleep is likely to lead to depression, is because for the physical level, again, just like you see a baby is cranky when it's tired, we're cranky when we're tired. So that's just the pure physical level of needing sleep. The second reason is a little bit more subtle and a little bit more interesting. What happens at night is that our mind processes a lot of the things that we have gone through throughout the day. And very often it solves unresolved issues that we have gone throughout the day. Which is why, you go to sleep with a math problem, often you wake up in the morning with a solution. But it's not just math problems that are solved at night. It is also other interpersonal, intrapersonal issues that are solved throughout the night. And if you look at dreams, usually the dreams that we have early on during the night are actually less pleasant, enjoyable dreams. We're more likely to have pleasant dreams later on in the night. Why? Because the first part of the night, that's when we're working on problems. We're dealing with issues. Some that were conscious, some that were not conscious during the day. Later on, after we have resolved a few of these problems, our dreams become more pleasant. Again, this doesn't mean you can't have a nightmare at 11:30 a.m., but it means that you're more likely to have bad dreams earlier on. And when we don't give ourselves the opportunity to quote-unquote complete our dreaming, complete problem solving through the night, we wake up with that problem unresolved. And then it's there, whether it's on the conscious or subconscious level, it's unresolved. And we pay a price for it. And over time, when we have a lot of unresolved issues, especially when they're suppressed or repressed, we're more likely to enter depression. So sleep for the physical need of sleep as well as for the psychological need of sleep. Everyone talks about beauty sleep. Why? Because that's manifest, that's obvious. You can tell when a person hasn't slept for 24, 36 hours. There are rings around the eyes, so you can hide them, but still you can see when someone is enervated. But it's not just about a beauty sleep. It's also about happiness sleep. It is also about intelligence sleep. Because we know that people who haven't slept, say, for 24 hours, after 24 hours, their IQ is reduced by 10 points or more. So there is beauty sleep for sure, but there is also happiness sleep as well as intelligence sleep. It's a good investment on every level. Here are just very briefly some tips on sleep. The first thing, more or less 8 hours a day. Find what is right for you, but that could mean 7 hours at night and 1 hour in the afternoon, or it could mean 6 and 2. But generally, we need 8 hours a day. If you can't get these 8 hours a day, and there are periods in your life where you won't be able to, such as exam period, where it may be a little bit more difficult to get the 8 hours, or another stressful period, or when you have children. So what do? Naps. Naps have actually been shown to be extremely effective. Cat naps during the day. Sleep for 20 minutes. It's not as good as sleeping the extra 2 hours at night, but it's certainly a lot better than not getting any sleep during the day. So naps are also a very good investment. Take a power nap for 15, 20 minutes during the day. That, to an extent, not like a full night sleep, but to an extent, restores some of the cognitive as well as the emotional capacities. Many people who have problems falling asleep, the reason is because they eat too late or they exercise too late, and the blood is still flowing fast, the heart is still beating, they're energized. So not to eat too much before some people, can fall asleep as they're eating. But there are certain people for whom it's a little bit more of an issue. So just watch your diet a little bit. watch your exercise regime not to exercise too late. Also, other people who have insomnia, in large numbers do have insomnia, is to give yourself permission to be human. I don't think there is one person in this room who hasn't at times had difficulty falling asleep. Before the SATs, before an exam, before a date. And it's natural. No, generally I don't have problems falling asleep. I get to 10 p.m. and I'm zonked. But sometimes when I did have problems during difficult periods, stressful periods, initially I would tell myself, okay, fall asleep now, fall asleep now, fall asleep, right? It's like, don't be anxious, don't be anxious. And then you have pink elephants preventing you from going to sleep. Instead, give yourself permission to be human. Now, if I have difficulty falling asleep, I say to myself, well, it's an opportunity to think and reflect. And very often that bores me and I fall asleep. Permission to be human. And finally, what are your internal rhythms? No, because we have the light bulb today, because we're living indoors as opposed to in huts that are exposed or caves that are directly in touch with nature, we have separated ourselves from nature. And we pay a price for it, whether we pay a price for it because we don't exercise enough, since we don't have to go hunt and gather, and we pay a price also because we don't pay attention, we're no longer cognizant, mindful or heartful of our internal rhythms. How many hours a night do you need? Are you a night person or a morning person? Do you need to go to sleep at 10 p.m. or do you need to go to sleep at 5 a.m.? What's right for you? And try and create a life that is in line with your natural needs. Now, that's not always possible. You know, if you go and work in college, it's relatively possible. You're quite flexible because you can come. This class is at 11:30, or most class it's also videotaped. So if you want to sleep till noon, that's fine too, and then you watch it. So you can play around with it when you work in the future, or when you were in high school, and high school started at 7:30 or 8. You had to be there. But still, as much as possible, try and be aware, cognizant of your internal rhythms in terms of the hours that you need and also when you need those hours. There's been a lot of research on sleep. I mean, there are entire seminars, classes just on the need for sleep. Let me summarize through the work of William Dement, who is a professor at Stanford and does a lot of sleep research when he's awake. Effects of sleep deprivation on health and well-being have been documented by research. Cognitive skills and physical performance are impaired by sleep deprivation, but mood is affected even more. People who get less than a full night's sleep are prone to feel less happy, more stressed, more physically frail, and more mentally and physically exhausted as a result. Sufficient sleep makes us feel better, happier, more vigorous, and vital. I don't think there's one person in the room who didn't already know this. Again, we're not teaching you anything new. I'm just reminding you of the things that you already know. Let me move on to a topic that is related to my favorite topic, and that is touch. Americans are, in general, again this is a generalization, average, in general, are among the least tactile people in the world. We spend a lot of time indulging our other senses, going to great restaurants, perfuming ourselves and our boyfriends with the best smell. But we don't touch enough. And it's a physical need, just like sleep is, just like exercise is, just like relationships are. And it's an important part of relationships. The best work in the area was done by Tiffany Field, who was a massage therapist and saw the effects of massage, went out, studied this topic, got her PhD, and now is a professor at the University of Miami. And what she showed through her research and other people's research is how important getting in touch with touch is. For example, for physical health, whether it's our immune system strengthens significantly with touch, weakens drastically without sufficient touch. It helps overcome injuries. And that's not just professional massage or professional physiotherapist, just the act of touch. Children grow more when they're touched, and we'll talk about research in a minute, some mind-boggling research. It's physical health, it's also mental health. Once again, children's cognitive development is affected by touch. Mental health in terms of mood disorders, eating disorders are associated very often with lack of touch or not enough touch. Depression and anxiety are caused by lack of touch, can be overcome often with more touch. And hopefully you're convinced now. Better sex life with touch. So William Masters and Virginia Johnson, two of the most important sex therapists and researchers. What they have shown is that sexual dysfunction, most sexual dysfunctions, in fact between 70 and 95% of them, can be solved simply with the help of touch. So what they're saying actually is that foreplay should not just be used as a means toward an end. They're saying that it can be an end in itself. And what touch does is essentially what positive psychology is all about. Sex, no. So, did I say that out loud? Yes, I guess I did. All right, so what positive psychology is about is, remember, getting us from the negative to the zero, but then getting us from the zero to the positive. So what they have shown in their research is that touch helps sexual dysfunction. Okay, let's function, let's get you here. But they're also saying is that touch then contributes to a thriving sexual relationship. So it's not just helping with problems, it's also taking us from the zero to the thriving. Marty Seligman has a book about looking at generally psychological interventions, those that work and those that don't. And as we've talked about in class a lot, most of the interventions do not work. We saw it with the Cambridge Somerville study, where 5 years of interventions actually had a negative effect in the long term. We see it with so many of the self-help books offering quick fixes. They don't work. He researched William Masters and Johnson's studies, and what he found, doing a meta-analysis, is that between 70 and 95% of the time their prescription works. Again, this is almost unheard of in social psychology or social sciences intervention. But these things work. Now, touch is a need, as I said earlier, just like touch is a need, just like physical exercise is a need, just like food and sleep are needs. So there's a story about a hospital ward for premature babies. And what they found there was that one of the sections in that hospital ward for premature babies had a much higher level of success compared to the other sections in the hospital ward. In other words, the babies were getting better much more promptly. They were healthier. When they followed them in the long term, they actually showed better cognitive as well as physical development. And they were wondering about it, and they thought, could it be the air? Could it be the location in the hospital? Because everything else was identical. They got the same food, they got the same treatment. And one of the doctors really wanted to find out what was it about this specific section in the hospital for premature babies that actually contributed so much to their well-being. So he was, watching the place, and then one night he was just sitting somewhere out of sight, and he heard a sound. And he looked, didn't want to be seen, and a nurse came in, a nurse whom he knew, who'd been in the hospital for a long time. And the nurse walked in, picked up a premature baby, which was against the rules in the hospital, because they cannot be touched. They had to be in their incubators. Picked up the baby and just stroked him. Just touched him very gently. Talked to him, and then put the baby down. And then walked to the next incubator, picked up the baby, and just very gently stroked him and put him back down, and did that to all the babies in that section of the ward. Now, she did it late at night during her shift because it was against the rules. And then she walked out. And that incident spawned off a whole line of research about the importance of touch with babies in general, specifically with premature babies. So Tiffany Fields did this study where premature babies were subject to 45 minutes a day of massage while they were in the hospital. Very gentle massaging. They're tiny. And what they found was that these babies put on 47% more weight while they were in hospital. A year later, when they were already at home, they had better development physically, as well as in terms of cognitive skills, as well as motor skills, just as a result of being touched more often. We need touch. It is an innate, instinctual need. In fact, there's been research on touch deprivation, and it wasn't done on human beings, it was done on monkeys. Harry Harlow, a very famous psychologist, worked with a group of monkeys whom he took away from their mothers, didn't provide them any touch. Every other need was provided. And what he found was that these monkeys didn't grow physically as much as the other monkeys. Their cognitive development was impaired, and they displayed autistic-like behavior. For example, they would sit down, put their legs up, and then rock. Have you seen this? You know, like in what's the movie with Dustin Hoffman? The Rain Man. You know, where he would just sit down and rock this way. So many of these monkeys displayed exactly this behavior, this rocking autistic behavior. Cruel study, whether it's done on ants or monkeys, certainly on human beings. Unfortunately, it has been done on human beings. This is one of the largest natural, tragic experiments ever carried out. This specifically was done in Romania, under Ceausescu, the cruel dictator that ruled over the country until 1989. One thing that he did was take many kids away from their parents, especially if the parents were dissidents, especially if the parents were not, quote-unquote, kosher communists. So he took their kids and raised 150,000 kids in homes away from their parents. Now, these homes, because it was a very poor country, had no money for nurses, for enough nurses, had no money for enough support staff in general. So while these kids got all their physical needs, in terms of food, water, and they were cleaned, they did not get much affection. Not because the nurses didn't want to give them affection, they just didn't have the time. In 1989, after the wall fell, Ceausescu was ousted, and these kids were released from these homes. And psychologists went in, and what they saw was the result of this tragic natural experiment. In terms of physical growth, these kids were between 3 and 10% in size relative to their age group. Cognitive growth, the level of way below the 100 IQ average. Motor development also impaired significantly as a result of lack of touch. And many of these kids were sitting down with their legs to their chest and just rocking. The effect of touch deprivation. Now, touch is important, once again, to get us here. And we're here, we're fine. The question is, how do we get beyond this? Well, touch can take us there as well. Not just to being okay, but also to thriving. The importance of touch. Virginia Satir, who's a psychologist, has this to say. We need 4 hugs a day for survival. We need 8 hugs a day for maintenance. We need 12 hugs a day for growth. Again, she says it half, in jest. There is not actual research showing how many hugs. Very good. You have 11 more left for today. But good. So there is, though, actual research on hugs. So this is Jane Clipman, who did research, and here was the intervention, very simple. It was every day give at least 5 hugs. These are frontal hugs, not with your partner, just hugs to different people, friends, can be your partner as well, but these are specifically non-sexual hugs. And what she found after 4 weeks was that the people who were in this group as opposed to the control group, and the control group had to write how many hours a day they read, the control group level of happiness obviously didn't go up. The group that hugged 5 times a day went up significantly. Now, this experiment, when she talks about, she says it was much more difficult for some people, especially for men. But even the men who were part of it, most of them hugged, so they would do it on the sports field, they would find opportunities, or somehow got in 5 hugs a day. And those people who did that actually became happier. Now, I was going to assign this as your response paper this week. I'm not going to do it, but I recommend it. So it's a very strong recommendation and suggestion. From now on and for the rest of your life, at least 5 hugs, preferably 12. The nice thing about hugs is that it's a win-win. Because when we hug someone, we're hugged back. When we touch someone, we're touched back. It's like happiness. When we share it, it grows. It's a win-win, positive-sum game. The important thing to keep in mind about hugs and touch in general is to respect the other person, because not everyone feels as comfortable being touched as we do. Or we may not feel comfortable being touched, and that's fine. For many reasons. One could be upbringing, one could be just physically, people are different. There are some people who enjoy touch much more than others, and that's fine, it's natural. So we need to respect other people's boundaries as well as have others respect our own. But in general, touch is important, touch is good, and we need to become a more tactile individual as well as a more tactile society. Let me show you an example now of how some people like hugs more than others. Okay, so once again, here is the prescription. Very simple. 4 times at least a week of 30 minutes of physical exercise, at least. Mindfulness meditation, if it's good for you, every day 10, 15 minutes. If not, at the very least, a few deep breaths strategically placed throughout the day. 8 hours of sleep a night, and at least 5, ideally 12 hugs a day. This is probably the most powerful psychological prescription that you will ever get or hear about. And all it does is bring us back to our base level of well-being, our God-given or genes-given level of happiness. Let's move on now to another topic. Here is what I want to talk to you about today. Okay. So let's talk about love. The most talked about topic, the most felt topic. Talked about everywhere from the dining room to the bedroom, to the classroom, evidently. And yet, it's the most misunderstood topic out there. Relationships, close, intimate relationships, whether it's with lovers, whether it's with family members, whether it's with close soulmates, friends, is the number one predictor of happiness. Our focus today will be on, and the next lesson will be on romantic relationships. However, we're focusing on romantic relationships simply because in many ways it's the tip of the stem. It includes many of the things that other relationships include. But the ideas that we talk about apply as much to close friendships, family relationships as well. Let me begin by showing you a nice little excerpt from the movie In Her Shoes, where Cameron Diaz reads something, beautiful poem, to her sister in the movie who's getting married.
And now,
just the volume, please. What is that? Root of the root, bud of the bud, the thing that keeps the stars apart. Well, let's try and understand it just a little bit more than we already do. Once again, relationships are a natural need. No person is an island. No one can survive. No one can certainly thrive without relationships. Let's revisit the research that we talked about a couple of months ago of extremely happy people. Remember, Ed Dinner and Marty Seligman chose the 10% happiest group, the tip of the stem, and studied them. And what are the things that they found, if you remember, was that they experienced hardships just like everyone else. They experienced anxiety, stress, depression at times, frustration. However, the difference between them and the rest, those who are not at the tip of the stem, is that they recover more promptly. They have a stronger immune system, in other words. And one of the reasons why they have a stronger immune system, one of the reasons why they interpret their experiences differently, is because they have, and this is a differentiator between them and the rest, they have thriving personal, interpersonal relationships. Whether it's with romantic partners, or with soulmates, or with family members, or all of the above. But this is one distinguishing characteristic of this group, that they have close, intimate relationships. And that makes all the difference. Why? For two reasons. First of all, because when you're happy and you share your happiness with someone close to you who truly cares about, that enhances, amplifies your happiness as well as their happiness. That's the win-win. When you go through hardships and difficulties, having close relationships helps us to overcome it. So again, whether it's from the negative to the zero or from the zero to the positive, close, intimate relationships contribute significantly to becoming happy. The key, though, in relationships is to know yourself, meaning to know your needs, because we don't all have the same relationship need. There is no one prescription. No, there is no, 5 hugs a day and you'll be happier. 5 close friends, 1 or 2 lovers, and there is no such prescription. It's different for different people. And I want to revisit the lasagna principle. Remember the lasagna principle from the happiness book? And that is that we all need, the example I gave there is, so I love my family is the most important thing in the world to me. However, that doesn't mean I want to spend, 8 or 10 hours a day with my family every day, all day. I also need my quota of solitude. I need my yoga. I need my exercise, my writing, my teaching. That does not mean that my family is any less important to me. Or let's say I love to write, which I do. I can write for 3 hours a day, not longer. And the reason why it was the lasagna principle, if you remember, lasagna is my favorite food. And whenever I go home, my mom makes lasagna. But that does not mean I want lasagna every day, all day. 5 times a week is more than enough for me. Or once a week. But you need to find your quota. The same with relationships. The same with relationships. Ask yourself, how many hours a day is it good for me, pleasant for me, enjoyable for me to spend with other people? One of the things that differentiates people in terms of the right amount is introversion and extroversion. We actually have a physiological base level of where we are compared to the optimum. Let me illustrate. So there is what's called an optimal level of arousal, cognitively speaking. Optimum level of arousal. And this, let's say, is our optimum level of arousal. And we're all born somewhere around this, either above, below. Very few people are right on the line. Introverts have a higher level of arousal, higher innate level of arousal. This is the introversion. Extroverts have a lower level of arousal compared to the optimal level. Now, we all physically see, or emotionally, cognitively, and physically look for experiencing the optimal level of arousal because that's where it's most convenient. That's when we are at our best. That's when we enjoy ourselves more. Which is why introverts whose innate natural state is above the optimal level of arousal actually need to reduce level of arousal. So they enjoy spending time by themselves. In contrast, extroverts have a lower arousal level, and it's not as pleasant as when they get it to the optimum level, so they go out to a party where there is a lot of arousal, a lot of things happening, a lot of people, in order to get to their optimal level of arousal. Which is why generally, what does alcohol do? Alcohol reduces our level of arousal. Which is why introverts very often need a glass of wine or a bottle before they dance. Because to dance when other people are watching increases levels of arousal. So what the alcohol does is reduce their level of arousal, and then dancing is comfortable and they're fine with it. In contrast, many extroverts need coffee, which is a stimulant, in order to stay awake. because the coffee gets them up to their optimal level of arousal. Again, I'm giving you a sketch of, there's a line of research ever since, I think, for decades about introversion and extroversion. Now, by the way, this does not mean that we cannot act, in the words of Brian Little, we cannot act out of nature. Meaning an introvert can act like an extrovert. Here I am, I'm an introvert, and by the way, this is we're born with this state. It's innate. So I was born an introvert, and yet when I stand in front of the class and sing beautiful songs, I'm acting like an extrovert. However, the important thing, while we can act out of nature, is to understand that very often this enervates us. It takes away energy. It's difficult for us because we're acting. So if I'm here, when I teach, I go even higher, even further from my optimal level of arousal. And that takes away energy, which is why introverts, after acting like extroverts, whether it's at a party or in a lecture, need what Brian Little calls a restorative niche. A restorative niche, a place to restore. And that would be a place where they would spend time one-on-one with someone, or some hours of solitude, of recovery. Remember, the problem is not stress. The problem is not stress. The problem is when we don't have recovery. And introverts need recovery, sometime on their own, sometime one-on-one. Which is why for me, for example, form of recovery is office hours. Easy for me to meet students for 4 hours straight. It's a form of recovery. If I was only teaching and only standing in front of an audience, that would ultimately lead to overwork and to me being lethargic. Same with an extrovert. If you're an extrovert, sometimes you have to do introvert stuff. So for example, you need to study for an exam. And yes, it would be nice to study for an exam at the Kong, but maybe not that helpful. So you study by yourself or with one person. And then what do you need after that as a restorative niche? Because it's enervating for an extrovert to be far from their optimal level of arousal. You need a restorative niche. Where is that restorative niche? I need to go out and party with friends. And that for them is a restorative niche. So again, know thyself. Know what your relationship needs are. Doesn't mean you cannot act out of nature. You can. But at the same time, you must be able to have a form of recovery, a restorative niche, according to your first nature, be it an introvert or an extrovert. To summarize, the number of relationships that you need that would be best for you depends on your personal, unique needs. The number of hours you want to spend with other people differs for everyone. There is no right or wrong here. Some people enjoy spending time 10 hours a day with friends, more the extroverts. Other people, one-on-one, intimate time, 2-3 hours a day is what they need. There's no right and wrong here. It doesn't mean you love people any less. Or neither does it mean that you don't need intimate relationships if you're one or the other. Both need close, intimate relationships. Soulmates, romantic partners, family members, whatever it is, it's a need. David Myers, there are few stronger predictors of happiness than a close, nurturing, equitable, intimate, lifelong companionship with one's best friend. There's been a lot more research done on opposite-sex relationship than on same-sex relationship. However, over the last few years, especially through the work of John Gottman from University of Washington, probably the leading researcher in this area, he's been doing much more work on single-sex relationship. And what they're finding, some very similar results with some differences. And we'll get to some of those interesting because they're informing differences. Probably not today, but next time. So when I talk about the relationship I'm talking about now, the relationship that David Myers is talking about is companionship, romantic relationship that is lifelong. Same sex or opposite sex. The interesting thing about relationships is that everyone benefits from it, but as I've mentioned already once before, men benefit more. Why do they benefit more? Because for the first time, often men have someone they can share with, whereas women have more often, more likely, have their girlfriends whom they talk to about certain issues. They share their happiness as well as their sorrows with. However, both sexes, in opposite and same-sex relationships, benefit from intimate relationships. Let me show you a quick video excerpt of a description of what marriage is all about.
So this is marriage. You wake up in the morning and she's there. You come home at night and she's there. You eat, she's there. You go to sleep, there. And I know that sounds like a bad thing. But it's not. It's not. Not if it's the right person. Then it's good. It's good. It's really, really good. I would like a minute for rebuttal.
So let's look at relationships. First of all, let's look at the state of affairs, at what's actually going on with long-term relationships today, marriage or other. What we see is not a very pretty picture. So when it comes to marriages, 2/3 of marriages today end up in divorce. This does not mean that the other third are thriving, because very often, people stay together out of a sense of duty, out of habit, because of a lack of alternative, because they think this is their lot in life. Now, and I'm certainly not going to argue for the fact that there are no marriages or relationships that should be dissolved. Of course there should be. Not every relationship is right, and we often make mistakes. But the argument I am going to make is that many of the relationships that end, or many of the relationships that reach a state, in the words of Thoreau, of quiet desperation, of just being there, of just sort of an inertia. Many of these relationships either should not have ended or can actually thrive. The problem, though, is that we see, certainly with the 2/3 who end up in divorce, but also with the other third, very often there is a failure to sustain love over time. I don't know anyone who has gone to the wedding ceremony or exchanged vows in another setting. I don't know of any couple who did that and say, well, this is just temporary. We're only going to do it for 2 years until death do us part, but not really. When people go into a relationship, their thought, their hope is to continue the exact same love and passion that they have at the beginning of the relationship. This is how relationships start. This is the promise of love. And yet, more often than not, evidently, things don't turn out as we expected them to have turned out. One of the main reasons for it, and one of the reasons that is cited by numerous sex therapists or psychologists, and again, you don't need research for that because it's so self-evident. One of the reasons is because love, and especially lust and passion, wears over time. Because we know that novelty produces higher levels of arousal, or in the words of Daryl Bem, from Cornell University psychologist, the exotic is erotic. If it's new, it's more interesting, more fascinating. And this explains why so many relationships end. The question, though, is that necessarily part of our nature? And the answer is yes and no. Yes, it's necessarily part of our nature that novelty excites us more, that we adapt to what happens. Remember, we're change detectors. We become much more aroused, whether it's cognitively, psychologically, or physically, physiologically, when there is something new. And we adapt over time for good and ill. Now, it would be wonderful if that wasn't the case for positive events, for positive experiences, such as finding a romantic partner. But it is, and the question is, what do we do with it? Let me first share with you, before we get to what do we do with it, let me share with you a study that I ran. Hopefully it will be published in a respectable academic journal soon. But my research question, which was a very important one, was, who's the hottest woman and the hottest man in the world? Or scientifically put, who's the fairest of them all? And I posed this question to my sophomore class when I taught a sophomore tutorial in psychology. And we had a long debate about it, but at the end we came up with scientific results. So those of you who don't have the PowerPoints in front of you, who do you think was chosen as the hottest male? You get an A. Anyone else wants an A? No. Who was chosen as the hottest male in the world? Bill Clinton? No. Who? George Clooney. Close but no cigar. You got it. Here he is, standing right outside Troy, telling Helen that he'll be right over. Who's the hottest female in the world, as scientifically proven by the sophomore tutorial? You, right. Another A. Who was she? Angelina Jolie, no. Halle Berry. Here she is telling Adrian Brody that she'll kill him if he comes a step closer to her. Now, imagine this. Imagine this. Imagine that you find your Brad Pitt or Halle Berry, your ideal man or woman. Not only are they sizzling hot, but they're also extremely sensitive, wise, way beyond their years, saintly, generous, benevolent, make $10 million a movie, and most importantly, they love you just as much, if not more, than you love them. Just imagine if that happens. And you meet your Brad Pitt or whoever your Achilles heel is, or you meet Halle Berry or Superwoman or Spider-Woman or whomever it is for you. Imagine that. And you see them and you talk to them and you fall in love and they fall in love with you. And you get married, and the first night after your marriage, or before that, that's your choice, you get home, no armor is going to stop you. No gun is going to drive you away. You make passionate love for hours and days and weeks and months. You don't even turn up for positive psychology. It's so good. Imagine that. Just imagine. And then, of course, the screen comes down and you live happily and lustily ever after. Right? Maybe. Now imagine this. 5 years into the relationship, with this amazing, sensitive, wise, hot, wealthy person. 5 years into the relationship. you take part in a psychological experiment. And here is the experiment. They hook you up to all these electrodes, to all these physiological cognitive measurements, and they measure your level of physiological arousal. And then your Brad Pitt or Halle Berry or whomever it is walk into the room, and they see how physically aroused you become. And then they leave, and then someone else who's moderately attractive, no Brad Pitt, Halle Berry, but someone who's moderately attractive walks into the room. When would you become more physically, instinctually, when would you become more physically aroused? In general, it doesn't always happen, but overwhelming majority of times. You'll become more physically aroused when the new person comes in. Why? Because the exotic is erotic, because novelty excites. Now, we laugh about this, but it actually to some extent explains the statistics, which is why so many relationships go sour when they start off with the best of intentions, with the most honest intentions, and yet they flounder, and this is part of the reason why. So is this bad news? Not necessarily. Well, it's not bad or good. It is. It's like talking about the law of gravity. Is the law of gravity bad? No, it's not bad. Is it good? It's not good either. It simply is. It's like what we talked about, painful emotions. Are they bad? No. Are they good? No. They simply are. And if we want to lead a happy life, if we want to have a thriving, healthy relationship, what we need to do is first and foremost accept nature. It's not good or bad news, it's simply real news. Or not news, because again, we all know this. And the question is, what do we do with it? How do we obey nature so that we can command it? And what I'm going to talk about today, and even more so next time, is how we can take relationships, given the fact that novelty excites, given the fact that on the physiological level, the arousal will be higher. By the way, it applies for men and women. The excitement will be higher when there's a new person. Given all that, how can we create relationships that thrive, that soar, that go way beyond the zero to the positive? And it's possible, and positive psychology can help us do it. The first step before accepting reality is understanding what true love really means. Because many people ask this question, does it even exist in reality? So yeah, it exists in fiction, it exists in movies, but these characters on the movie screen are literally larger than life. They deliver perfect lines. They make perfect love. How am I going to be able to do that? And therefore, how am I going to be able to experience what they're experiencing? Does true love really exist? Because can I ever live up to the kind of relationship that Ingrid Bergman and Humphrey Bogart had? Can I reach the heights of 40,000 feet? Can I have the same mystical connection as Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks had? And will I ever be able to sleep with the British Prime Minister? Or a Hugh Grant? Is it possible? Is it real? And self-help books don't help much. One of my actual favorite self-help writers, Leo Buscaglia, was also a professor at the University of Southern California, wonderful writer, compassionate, passionate speaker, helped me a lot. It was the first self-help book that I read. It was about living, loving, and learning. Here is what he writes about love and relationships. Perfect love is rare indeed. For to be a lover will require that you continually have the subtlety of the very wise, the flexibility of the child, the sensitivity of the artist, the understanding of the philosopher, the acceptance of the saint, the tolerance of the scholar, and the fortitude of the certain. What a beautiful passage. So beautiful and so detrimental. Who can live up to this? Anyone? No. You see, there is no perfect love. To expect this of myself, of my partner, of our relationship, is to set us up for failure. I would not want Tommy to expect this in her partner. Because I can guarantee you I will fail her. I have failed her, according to the standards. As she me. It's impossible, it's unrealistic, and we set ourselves up for failure when our expectations are larger than life, when our expectations are perfect lines or perfect love. And yet this is what we read about, this is what we see, and we begin to internalize this, the straight line of a relationship, which is perfect and unreal. But while perfect love doesn't exist, true love does. True love exists between imperfect humans. What is true love? How can positive psychology help us identify it? First, by asking different questions than have mostly been asked in this area. Second, by focusing not just on what works, but on what works best. On the few relationships that really thrive, that have not dissolved, that have not ended, that are not just here in a state of quiet desperation, or as Pink Floyd said, just comfortably numb, but relationships that are here. Let's learn from them. Let's learn from the tip of the stem. So the first thing we need to do is reframe the questions. Remember, we did the exact same thing with at-risk youth. We did the exact same thing with people who are happy, healthy, and successful. We did the same thing when it came to the geometric shapes. Because questions start a quest, and questions define reality. And traditional psychology has asked couples counselors, researchers in the area have asked, why do so many long-term relationships fail? Why do so many people, after a year or 2 or 5 years together, end their relationship? Why is it that many people who do stay together are no longer thriving? And one of the answers that they got was because novelty arouses. Because it's part of human nature to seek excitement. The erotic is exotic. That's one of the answers. And again, it's a true answer. It's an important thing to take into consideration. It's part of reality, whether we like it or not. But that question is not enough. Just like the similar question was not enough when we asked about at-risk population, or when I asked you about the geometric shapes. And when we only ask this question, we quite literally miss a part of reality, and a very important part of reality. A part of reality that can lead to lasting, thriving, passionate relationships. And the question that positive psychology asks is, what makes some relationships thrive and grow stronger over time? Because there are such relationships. Now, I was fortunate to see a relationship like that between my grandmother, whom I told you about, and my grandfather. They were married for 53 years. The pictures that we have of them and the way they were together is that my grandmother, who was the matriarch of the family, very powerful woman, but always also very humorous, was of her sitting down and my grandfather next to her with his hand on her shoulder, just looking at her. Just like a 16-year-old in love. They were married for 53 years. Of course, with their ups and downs and disagreements and disappointments, they're not perfect either. But they had a thriving relationship. Passionate relationship. What is it about these relationships? What makes them successful? And the important question is, what can we learn and apply to our relationships if what we're interested in is a long-term, passionate relationship? So let's learn from what works. Let's learn not just from what works, but let's learn from what works best. The best relationships that we can look at and study and learn from. Here are some of the lessons that we can learn from these relationships. And I'm going to draw on two researchers. First, John Gottman, whom I mentioned before, and the second, David Schnarch. David Schnarch, as well as John Gottman, as I mentioned earlier, have done research, very good research, on opposite as well as same-sex relationships. Here is some of the things that they find I will talk about. First, when I figured out how to predict divorce, I thought I had found the key to saving marriages. But like so many experts before me, I was wrong. I was not able to crack the code of saving marriages until I started to analyze what went right in happy marriages. He wrote this, if I'm not mistaken, in 1999. In 2001, he took it a step further, and we'll see next week in the research, where he studied same-sex relationships and learned even more things than he had learned when studying what goes well in opposite-sex relationships. But the key was to study successful relationship, whatever the relationship was, whatever its nature was. And when he studied those, that made all the difference. He can predict divorce with an accuracy level of 94%. 94%, that's an unheard of figure in social sciences. Quite remarkable. And then he was able to do it, but it didn't help him create better long-term relationships. It was only when he started to ask this question, what makes some relationships thrive and grow stronger over time, that's when he went ahead and was able to prescribe better relationships. The second person we'll draw on is David Schnarch, and here is what he says in his wonderful book, Passionate Marriage. Cellulite and sexual potential are highly correlated. What he showed in his research studying the best relationships is that not only do they enjoy spending time together over the years, but that the best sex that they have in their lives doesn't come when they are 18 or 25 or 35. It actually is for 50s and 60-year-olds. So you have a lot to look forward to. Now, that does not mean it can't be great at 18. It can be even greater at 50 and 60. That's what he showed in his research of thriving relationships. Now, these are not the majority of the relationships, unfortunately, because most people today, by the age of 50 and 60, they're into their second or third marriage or long-term relationship. However, very often, it is later on that it becomes better. And that's where it veers away, goes away from the just physiological level of arousal, which may be stronger at the age of 24, they say, for men, and 35 for women. I mean, I don't know where they get these numbers from. But we actually peak, potentially, note the word here, potentially we peak in our 50s and 60s. Why? We'll understand later. So here are the things that we're going to talk about in the next class. We're going to engage in growing tip statistic. We're going to look at the best relationships, just like we looked at the best teacher, Marva Collins, just like we looked at the best meditators, Lama Oster, and others. We're going to look at the best relationships and ask, what can we learn from it and apply to our lives? 1 minute. And we're going to talk about 4 different topics. First, that a relationship is about hard work. If you want to thrive at work, you need to work hard. If you want to thrive in a relationship, you need to invest. Second, and we'll talk about how to invest, that the best relationships are ones that create high levels of intimacy, that get to know one another in a deeper level. And these are the relationships that thrive. These are the relationships that also maintain passion and enhance passion 5, 10, and 50 years hence. The best relationships are not relationships devoid of conflict, and we'll talk about what that means and what that looks like. And finally, we're in a positive psychology class. It is about appreciating the positive, because when we appreciate the good appreciates, whether in ourselves or in others. See you on Thursday.